Hey, this is Cedric Youngelman, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. Thank you so much for checking out my show, where we have philosophical conversations about the economic, cultural, and psychological implications of Bitcoin. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. If you're watching the Bitcoin Matrix podcast on YouTube, pound that like button so that more people see the show and turn those notifications on so you don't miss out on any new, fresh, and dope content. This episode with Christian Keroles, aka CK Snarks, about how no one is bullish enough on Bitcoin is brought to you by River. Buy and mine Bitcoin with zero fees on recurring orders when you dollar cost average at river.com. Truly the best way to build your Bitcoin wealth. River doesn't use or lend your Bitcoin. All Bitcoin at River is held in secure cold storage with 100% full reserves. You can withdraw your Bitcoin at any time. To get started and find out for yourself, use the link in the show notes and get $20 free when you buy Bitcoin at river.com. There's literally no better time than now to get your Bitcoin off your exchange and into your own custody. My favorite hardware wallet is the Cold Card from CoinKite, and it's definitely worth learning how to use it. Built-in sleep at night technology, the only dedicated air-gapped, ultra-secure hardware wallet for Bitcoin. Use the link in the show notes for 5% off your order. 10 days until the world's biggest Bitcoin conference goes down again in Miami, May 18th to 20th. It's going to be off the hook, and you definitely want to be there. Hit me up when you get down here, and we can grab an ice-cold beer on a roof deck on South Beach before or after all the awesome content. To get 10% off your ticket and help support me and the Bitcoin Matrix podcast, use the code MATRIX at b.tc/conference. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with CK Snarks to talk about how it's nearly impossible to be bullish enough on Bitcoin, how 37 sats will be generational wealth one day, what makes the Bitcoin conference so special, and how to make the best steak at home.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Christian Keroles, aka CK Snarks, is a journalist and the managing director at Bitcoin Magazine. CK hosts the Bitcoin Magazine podcast, FedWatch podcast, Bitcoin Magazine Spaces, and covers Bitcoin as it monetizes. CK, welcome back to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
I'm amazing, Cedric. Thank you for having me back on. I think last time I came on the pod, maybe like almost 2 years ago, was a blast. I loved that episode. I think I even listened back to it. So I had a great time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost 3 years ago now. I think it was in October of 2020.
Wow.
You said yes to come on the show before I even aired a single episode. I still find that kind of amazing, just that people would be that generous and courageous with their time. Yeah, you had very kind words after the show, and honestly, you've been one of the biggest supporters behind the scenes of the show, helping me out kind of get off the ground with this podcasting thing, and even just being extremely honest. At what point you told me, hey, stop whatever you're doing on Twitter right now. Stop making horrible tweets and retweets and learn how to meme. And that was very helpful, to be honest, and kind of snapped me out of bad habits. So I really appreciate the support. You led to and helped me get my first sponsor. So much appreciation there. How you been these last 2.5 years?
Been great, man. Life's a whirlwind. So, yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has gone a long way. This industry has been an absolute roller coaster. Been growing with Bitcoin Mag the whole time. So it's been a lot of fun.
I'm sure.
I have to make one correction. I am I'm all the things that you said I am, except I'm not. I'm definitely not a journalist. So
Okay.
I'm definitely not a journalist, but
Maybe I should have said
yeah.
marketer. Uh,
I do stuff. My background is sales and marketing, but yeah, I'm definitely not a journalist.
Fair enough. Well, speaking of not a journalist, though, you are a general manager, I believe, of Bitcoin Magazine. And seems like Bitcoin Magazine transforms and evolves. I wouldn't say every year, but over time. What has that experience been like working at Bitcoin Magazine the past few years? And before we even get into the conference.
Yeah, so I've been with Bitcoin Magazine since 2018. So my 5-year anniversary was in February. And it's been a whirlwind. For me, it's been a personal journey, kind of growing up at the company effectively. And yeah, the company has evolved, and that has kind of given me and others opportunities. But at the same time, it's kind of like forced everyone to learn things on the go, right? We built a conference from 1,200 people to 26,000 people in 4 years. And that definitely doesn't come without trials and tribulation.
Sure. And then before, I mean, I want to talk about the conference too, but magazine, one thing that I thought was interesting that's been a development of the last maybe year, 18 months, is you guys are doing physical printed copies now. What is sort of the inspiration behind that, and what has that experience been like?
Well, we are Bitcoin Magazine, right? And the original Bitcoin magazines, which were created from 2012 to 2014, there's actually 22 issues of them. 22 issues. Like our company BTC Inc. purchased that in 2015, and then from there, it's kind of been a journey to bringing the magazine back. So in 2019, we did the 10th Bitcoin's 10th anniversary, magazine, because we couldn't, we took that opportunity, like we are gonna make a Bitcoin magazine, a physical Bitcoin magazine, and now that we owned the entity of Bitcoin Magazine and BitcoinMagazine.com. So we made the 10th anniversary Bitcoin Magazine. I was actually at the company at that point. And then we didn't make a magazine for 2 years. We were planning on making a magazine in 2020, but it never happened due to COVID. Like, priorities have to like focus on like kind of core business elements. So the magazine had to take a break. But after we did Bitcoin 2021 in Miami, which I think you were at that event,
Mm-hmm.
we had enough momentum, and we had a really energized executive, Mike Germano, and we brought back the Bitcoin magazine as it is known today. And that issue, that's issue number 24. That is the El Salvador issue, which is absolutely iconic. I think it's gonna, resonate as a masterpiece in Bitcoin history. And Now we're at issue 29, which is about to ship to our warehouse in Nashville. I cannot wait. It has Julian Assange's face on it. I think it's the most beautiful cover that we've done so far. The magazine itself is full of Easter eggs, and even has some Bitcoin hidden away inside the text. So it is a really, really awesome piece of art. It is a really, really awesome Bitcoin artifact, if you will. So I'm really proud of what that has become from issue 24 to now issue 29, that we have really brought back the Bitcoin magazine on a quarterly basis. We do a new one.
Yeah. What I think is what I really want to get into here, though, is just that to me, it reminds me, or brings me back to growing up with sort of fanzines, whether it was punk rock or indie rock. You picked up your favorite magazine and kind of bringing culture into the physical space, which I think Bitcoin is going to start leading culture at some point, like kind of like hip hop did in the 80s and the 90s, and kind of this interface with art and physical things you can hold and touch and read. I think is special.
Totally, and we totally agree, and that drives a lot of what we do. If for whoever's watching the video, I don't even know if there is a video, but I'm holding up our Orange Party issue. This is like sealed in plastic. We have a little extra piece of collector's memorabilia right here. But yeah, the actual magazines are thick, they're beautiful. And we're trying to really focus on creating an amazing product that Bitcoiners are going to cherish for a long time. And I think if you look at the covers of what we've done, from the El Salvador issue all the way to the broke issue, which Cedric is holding right now, like, I think we've nailed it every single time.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. The broke issue has it seems like the headline is frauds, and it's got SBF on it with a sort of a pig nose, kind of iconic. It does kind of capture the essence of the zeitgeist of the moment. And it brings me back to my thought. I wanted to congratulate you on getting married. I believe you moved to Nashville. So sort of continuing with, I mean, you left a Bitcoin city in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but, high tech city. There's definitely a Bitcoin presence there. But, Nashville, even with Bitcoin Magazine and Bitcoin Park, what has it been like? What has your experience been like in Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco, when I was living in San Francisco and discovered Bitcoin, is one of the top Bitcoin cities. I would say it was San Francisco and New York. And COVID changed everything. The landscape completely changed. And I think first it was Texas, and then it was Florida, and then it was Nashville. That was like the three cities that really got the influx of Bitcoiners. I actually helped bring back the San Francisco scene back to life. It completely vanquished, like literally vanquished. And then me and a Telegram group of 15 people, we started organizing beach hangouts, and those beach hangouts turned into bar hangouts. And now it's called, now it's Bay Area Bitcoiners. It is a meetup segment that meets 8 times a month across the Bay Area, 2 times in San Francisco, 1 time in East Bay, 1 time in North Bay, 1 time in South Bay, one time in the Silicon Valley area. So it is really blown up. Shout out to the entire Bay Area Bitcoiners crew. Like, all I did, like, I started the Telegram group. I showed up to the beach hangouts. That's really all I contributed. The rest, was all of that community. But it is amazing to see how quickly that has flowered, and the Bay Area Bitcoiners are back. And then being in Nashville is absolutely awesome. Bitcoin Park is the premier, like, in-person Bitcoin location. So I absolutely love that. And then the Bitcoin Magazine office is absolutely classic. It's in a building called, sorry, I'm not going to dox the name, but it's in a classic building in the city. It has brick walls. It's kind of has like wood floors. Everything is really kind of, I don't know the word to describe it. I'm not really that into architecture, but it just feels very good inside the office. A lot of good energy, a lot of good lights, big windows. It's a great place to be, and it's just awesome to see Bitcoin stuff absolutely everywhere. And then Nashville itself is a booming city. So I was living in San Francisco. I kind of have been seeing it every single year get worse than the last. And then here in Nashville, it feels like every single year, every single neighborhood is getting better every single week and every single month. So, just a couple weeks ago, a bunch of brand new bars and restaurants and coffee shops opened up within walking distance of my house. So it's really awesome to be here in Nashville.
Yeah, it seems super exciting. I've heard great things about Nashville. We just moved to Florida this year. We left outside of Chicago. We drove through Tennessee a few
Congrats.
times. Thank you very much. Very excited. And when we drove through Tennessee, though, we didn't stop in Nashville. We kind of stopped in like Chattanooga and different places, and kind of
Chattanooga's
see.
cool.
Yeah, I have some of the best barbecue I ever had in my life. Just some
Sugar's
roads.
Ribs.
But
Do you go to Sugar's Ribs?
maybe I don't even know the name of it. It was right off the highway. We pulled in. I had some takeout. Had it right on the hood of the car. We had the dogs. We couldn't sit inside or anything like that, and it's fantastic. And I'm sure there was a dozen like that in the city, and maybe Sugar's is the best. I don't know, but we love barbecue, especially Southern food, and yeah, we were very excited about Tennessee and Kentucky and Georgia. Um, but I want to continue. Well, one, I'm kind of curious. What kind of scene is it like at the Bitcoin Magazine office? I've been working from home for a few years from now, and before that, it was pretty corporate type stuff, like an Oracle or larger companies. How many people are in the office? Bitcoin Park. What's the scene like and the vibe?
Yeah, so I would say, like, Austin, Texas is kind of like the developer hub of Bitcoin. And I would say Nashville is almost like the cultural hub of Bitcoin. So when it comes to the Bitcoin Magazine office, we have like a pretty high. It's pretty volatile. It'll go from anywhere from 5 people are in the office to like 25 people are in the office, and it just depends on who's traveling into Nashville from our remote team, how many people are in the office on that given day. We have about 25 people in Nashville of a team of 80 people, so we're actually mostly remote. Um, and then that team in Nashville, like there's some people that go in every day, like myself. There's some people, but I'd still travel. There's some people that kind of like they have their one day that they come in a week, and there's some people that have a few days that they come in a week. So it just really it's a kind of a complete flux. But the office itself is very much like a startup environment. There's like these pods of desks. There are a few conference rooms. There is there's a studio with like a Shure mic and all that stuff, easy plug in. You just put your laptop in, plug it all up, and it's easy to go. You can podcast or live stream all easy like that. And there's like a living room with like double monitors on the wall, and we always have the Bitcoin price up. We always have music playing. The fridge is always stocked with like caffeine and water. There's a lot of beef jerky, stuff like that. So we have a massive copy station. So that's kind of the vibe in the office. It's very much feels like a Bitcoiner office. All the art is Bitcoin. And then Bitcoiner Park, the building itself is absolutely epic. The building was built by a band called Florida Georgia Line. So it's pretty much built to be a like recording studio for a band or multiple bands, and that got purchased. So it's like a co-working space and a recording studio and a big event space, all in 2 different buildings on one like plot of land. And one of the buildings is like super heavy doors, super soundproofed rooms. Like when you're in those rooms, like your ears kind of feel funny because you're not used to how quiet the soundproofed room is. So perfect for podcasting. Like all the rooms could be plugged up, so you could be in one room, I could be in one room, someone else could be in one room, and we could be making like content together theoretically through the internal system. Like it is just an absolutely epic space. We and a bunch of that, they kind of have a lot of artists that contribute art to their space. We contribute a bunch of art to their space. Bitcoin Magazine has a collection of art that we curate and manage and stuff like that. So we're very much in like the Bitcoin culture and art game. So that's a big thing that we do, and we're part of what Bitcoin Park does here in Nashville too. So it's a lot of fun, and the Bitcoin Park team, Rod and Odell and Josh, they put on like a little mini Bitcoin week every single month in Nashville. So there's always stuff happening, and then I'm probably at Bitcoin Park like every other week, for Bitcoin week plus once again in the month, just co-working. There's people who are co-working there, doing their things. I'm in the office a lot. We obviously have our own presence, so I'm trying to give my energy to Bitcoin Magazine as often as I can.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. So, I mean, like just turning obviously to taking, this seems like the, Bitcoin Magazine, physical magazine, this is year round, this is ongoing, this is, the ever evolving, growing nature of Bitcoin and documenting it. But once a year, we all get together, and for the last 3 years, or including this one, it's gonna be in Miami. So the pilgrimage, and the family gets together.
Exactly.
And it's epic. So what can we expect this year? How is this year different?
Yeah, I would say this year is really about execution, and this year is really about diving deep into what's happening in the market. I'm really excited for the content this year. I'm really excited for the audience. The audience, I would say, is going to be like almost 50% smaller than Bitcoin 2022. Like that's how big this bear market is kind of hitting the space. But Bitcoin prices are about 50%. And they were 25% of the prices of Bitcoin prices like leading up to this event. So it's definitely a bear market event, but it's still the biggest bear market event in history, right? So there's still tens of thousands of Bitcoiners coming together in Miami Beach. And in terms of like the content that I'm excited for Tulsi Gabbard, who is going to be on the main stage. So this is someone who's very interesting in the political sphere, who is saying a lot of things that our Bitcoiners are interested in. She went from liberal to, now she seems like she's flipped conservative, and she has an opportunity to make a statement in front of Bitcoiners. So could she flip orange, right? We have Michael Lewis, who's going to be talking to Arthur Hayes, who's going to be meeting VIPs backstage, who is writing a book about what happened with FTX. And this is like one of the premier business authors in modern business literature, right? So The Big Short, Moneyball, all those are just a couple of names of his many hits. Eric Weinstein coming back, Zoltan Posner. So we do our best, like with the politicians, to kind of reach to traditional finance. So Zoltan obviously is probably the most vaunted and relevant name in macro over the last year and a half. He was at Credit Suisse. Or maybe he still is. I don't know. Does Credit Suisse still exist? I don't know. But he's going to be coming on again, talking to Bitcoiners, interacting with Bitcoiners, having an opportunity to see what the Bitcoin ecosystem is like. Jack Mallers making another big announcement. We have Ridwan Kamil, who is the governor of a province in Indonesia. So Indonesia has hundreds of millions of people as a population. And he's going to be making an announcement with Samson Mao. So many incredible names. You can go to b.tc/conference/speakers. Again, ton of awesome content. Happy to like even run through some of the agenda items that I'm excited for. But I'm really hyped about that. And again, so much stuff to talk about. So I guess I'll pass it over to you so I can take a sip of water here.
Sure. I mean, I want to kind of talk about these first three names you brought up: Michael Lewis, Tulsi Gabbard, Eric Weinstein. I don't know how to say his name, but those, I feel like that's kind of growing the tent. Whether however much Bitcoiners they are or aren't, it's definitely kind of expanding who's involved in the conversation. Especially someone like Tulsi. I'm curious what her take on, or her, like, not motivation to obviously to speak to more people, but like why Bitcoiners. I would be curious what her thoughts would be there. Michael Lewis, I mean, The Big Short is just one of my favorite pieces of work. He's written other incredible books. You mentioned Moneyball. Fascinating Mind. That seems like a really interesting conversation and pairing with Arthur Hayes, especially Arthur's background in trading. Indonesia. I've been invited to speak at Bitcoin Indonesia. So hopefully that will go through.
Bullish.
So that'll be exciting. What about culturally? What maybe we could expect outside the speakers, or from an artistic or musical standpoint?
Totally. And, before we jump over, Tulsi Gabbard's topic on Friday the 19th at 3 p.m. on the main stage is titled Freedom Money. And she, our selling point to her is this is a group of 10,000 plus freedom advocates on the bleeding edge of freedom. And here's a video from Bitcoin 21 when we were the largest gathering since the Super Bowl. Pushing pushing the edge of freedom in the US. So she was really motivated by being with freedom lovers. And I think she is very interested in Bitcoin as freedom money. In terms of the cultural element, I would say there's multiple areas here. One is we have our art gallery. So we've done this now. This is going to be our third year in a row doing the art gallery. And this is the biggest year yet. This is the most sophisticated year yet. One second. Excuse me.
No
A lot of pollen here in Nashville these days. So the allergies are definitely acting up. But most sophisticated art gallery. I'm really, really excited for this art gallery. It's going to be the best, biggest, most beautiful, incredible art gallery yet. And these art galleries, like when people walk through them, it is really, really impressive. And I am really excited for what we're able to do this year. Beyond that, we have a whole area of the event that's called the Bitcoin Bazaar. And the whole idea of the Bitcoin Bazaar is like these are merchants who are selling goods that Bitcoiners want, whether it's like a Bitcoin knickknack or whether it's like, tallow based lotion, or whether it is like premium meat or organic wine or other, high quality goods that Bitcoiners want, and they're accepting it for Bitcoin. So we worked with 50 plus merchants that are accepting Bitcoin and selling high quality, interesting wares and food and awesome stuff. And we gave them pop-up shops at the conference. And then lastly, we have an element of the event called the Bitcoin Games Arena. We have 50 plus Bitcoin meetups that have organized teams. And these teams are going to be competing in they're going to be competing in why am I completely blanking out the name of this game? What's the game where you're tossing the sack? Yeah, cornhole. So they're going to compete in cornhole. They're going to be competing in Bitcoin Family Feud. They're going to be competing in a chess tournament. They're going to be competing in having to put together a seed signer the fastest. And they're going to be competing ultimately for the chance to win a Bitcoin in order to kind of stem and support their meetup into the future. So really, really excited about that competition. Again, it is going to be really fun to see Bitcoiners compete for this Bitcoin prize and watch the teams as they kind of go March Madness style through this tournament and play for the end at the Bitcoin Games Arena. So those are 3 cultural elements I'm super, super excited for. And then beyond that, like, we're trying to bring together as many cultural actors to the event as possible. So professional athletes, politicians, musicians, comedians. So a lot of surprises still to come, even here with only 18 days until the event.
Yeah, I mean, every year it feels like, we get together for this sort of like Coachella or Burning Man or Lollapalooza type event. And for me, that really, 2021 was the first time I went, maybe the second time, a real first big event. First time was like a barbecue to meet Bitcoiners and be around Bitcoiners and have spontaneous conversations and find out what people are like in real life and meet your friends on Bitcoin Twitter. But it also kind of helps you put on, the orange colored sunglasses and imagine a bright orange future where people are accepting Bitcoin and trading value for value and or imagining hyper Bitcoinization. So that kind of takes me to tonight's main topic and what I've been thinking about for maybe 5 or 6 months or maybe longer since you've been on this campaign. And it's been very helpful for me thinking about this stuff. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about it. But in those lines, are Bitcoiners bullish enough?
I mean, it's a trick question because it's not possible to be bullish enough on Bitcoin if it is what we think it is, right? If it works. So being bullish enough means being able to kind of grok progress that is built off of the Bitcoin standard. And that requires someone who has, like, one, is extremely creative, but 2 is just extremely, extremely intelligent and first principle, thinking. And the average person is not. A really good way to think about this is, the average person thinks they're an above average driver. Mathematically, that's not possible. Like, you're probably an average driver. I know I can admit that I'm a below average driver, so don't get behind the wheel. Don't get in the car with me behind the wheel. But despite that, it is impossible to be bullish enough on Bitcoin if Bitcoin works, because none of us are Nikola Tesla level geniuses. He was the only one back then who was bullish enough on electricity. plain and simple. And Bitcoin is that kind of a upgrade to humanity in terms of this perfect money that we've never had before.
So then that leads me to how do you think about Bitcoin being or the outcome of Bitcoin as binary?
Yeah, so I think it's really binary, but I guess to slightly go away from that talk track, I think that there's probably three likely scenarios for Bitcoin, and they're likely in this order. So slightly different than binary, but most likely scenario is hyper Bitcoinization. So that is infinity divided by 21 million. Bitcoin is the perfect money that is powered by software, and it is going to take over the world just like we've seen other technological innovations doing so. Option number two is Bitcoin fails, either because the incentives end up being broken and it can't continue to propagate into the future, or it is made obsolete for whatever reason. So whether that is a better innovation comes around and we have no idea of forecasting that, or whether, something comes and, for whatever reason it breaks, that's option two. It just goes to zero. Bitcoin breaks. Bitcoin becomes irrelevant. Just like, do you know what were the competitors to TCP before TCP won? No. So that could be Bitcoin. Like, let's be honest. Like, that could be Bitcoin. I don't think that's going to be the case, but that could be Bitcoin. And then option number three, which I think is by far the least likely, and this is why I say Bitcoin's binary, because I think it's either win or lose, most likely. The least likely option, I think it just doesn't even make sense, is that Bitcoin is just some other asset, which is the current situation. Right now, there's many assets to invest in: Bitcoin, shitcoin, stocks, real estate, bonds, CDOs, art, NFTs, whatever. You can invest in all of these different things, right? There's a Cambrian explosion of, seemingly investable assets. A Bitcoin world, in my opinion, is a world where there's like, here's the asset, and then like everything else is risk and reward based off of that asset. So that's why I think like the least likely scenario is the current status quo, which is like Bitcoin is just some other asset in a world of assets. I think it's so unlikely that it's I really do think Bitcoin is binary. Like Bitcoin's the thing, or hopefully something else is a thing, because otherwise it's just going to be a draconian world, run by despotic governments. But or Bitcoin's going to fail. So I really do think Bitcoin's the thing, or it fails. Those are really the two most likely outcomes. The least likely outcome is Bitcoin is just some other asset, which is confusing because that's the current status quo right now, is Bitcoin is an asset amongst other assets.
Yeah. The third option, which is where we are today, is interesting. Is like my initial thought is I would see that as a failure of Bitcoin as the discovery we've been talking about for the last 14 years. I don't know if Satoshi would see that as a failure. It would still be a life raft for some, and it'd be working as intended. It's interesting, everyone thinks they're funny, everyone thinks they have good taste. Beta lost out to VHS, and it was the better technology back in the early 80s. But I'm kind of curious, like right now, I think also Bitcoiners tend to think about things through a very Bitcoin focused lens, and that the world is almost reacting to Bitcoin. And I sometimes make the argument that Bitcoin is insignificant to 99.9% of the world. They don't take it seriously, or they're ignoring it, or they're naive to it. And it's really not driving much. And in that regards, are Bitcoiners arrogant?
Well, I definitely do think that Bitcoin is making its impression and its impact on the world even today. I wouldn't go as far as saying Bitcoiners are arrogant, but I would say that Bitcoiners are definitely not humble enough. And I think being appropriately bullish on Bitcoin requires a extreme amount of humility, because like you have to be humble to the fact that you're too stupid to be bullish enough. And then you have to raise your bullishness to another factor, beyond what you think even makes sense. But Yeah, I mean, I've talked about, I went on Citadel Dispatch, and I said Bitcoiners need to be a lot more humble. And I think, Bitcoiners need to think through a lot of elements of how difficult it's going to be to get to that world where Bitcoin has that purchasing power that they desire, right? Like they need to get their sats from here to that world, and I think it's going to be a journey. You and I, we've already kind of started repositioning ourselves geographically, potentially for that journey. But I think this is just, the beginning. I think, we're going to look back and we're going to be like, that was the calm before the storm. I think that's really going to be the outlook. So, and it's going to require a lot of humility, a lot of forethought, a lot of planning, I think, to get across the finish line with the maximum amount of sats that we have today. Like, this is sad to say, but I think a lot of Bitcoiners most likely somewhere in the last 6 months or in the future, 12 months, will have peaked in sat count, because I think it's going to be that turbulent in the future, that, people are just going to have less sats beyond maybe what they have in the next year or so.
Yeah, I've kind of pondered that quite a bit. And I think you've kind of said it as, you got to get your sats and your family to 2030 in one piece. And I thought deeply on that. And what I got out of what you were saying too is, or you went on, I'm paraphrasing, but you were saying how, if you've been stacking for any amount of time, even if it's a short amount of time, if you've been taking this thing seriously, then you probably have enough Bitcoin, enough sats, whatever amount that is, that if this thing does what we think it's going to do, you're going to have enough. And that you have to kind of think more 360 degrees about securing your sats, not getting over your skis, monitoring your own income, cash flow, balance sheet, survivability, security, and inheritance, even, just to get what you have now. Because if what you have now is the peak, and kind of building on that is what I gather. I mean, bull markets are way harder than bear markets. Bulls is much more. Riding a bull is a little different than running from a bear. Both could be deadly. But if you're trying to stay on the bull's trying to get you off. And I think what a lot of people don't think about there is, whatever your stack is, when your stack goes through a 10x or a 100x, the difference between going down 90% there and then having to get, 1,800% to get back, or whatever it is mathematically, and the volatility at that point. And I think a lot of people are still thinking in dollars. So yeah, how have you been thinking about that stuff?
Yeah, well, firstly, to just address, like, do you have enough sats? I would say getting to the point where your sats are at maximum buying power, which is when it makes the most sense to, like, spend them. It's a very, very, very different world. So you have to get really far to get there. And beyond that, the best way to try to think about that world into the future is that, I guess, step back. If you're a Bitcoiner, why do you hate the current system so much? It's so inefficient. It wastes human capital. It wastes real capital. It's difficult to use it to make appropriate economic calculation. It's easily weaponized and centralized. It requires third parties to go on the internet, which are attack vectors. It requires licensing and bureaucratic process in order to permissionly access it. There's so many things about it that are terrible, which ultimately makes humans unable to reach their full potential at this given time and with these given resources, because of the inefficiencies of our financial system, right? So the financial system is weighing us down from our potential. Like the financial system itself is a cap on our wealth. And what's the reason we like Bitcoin? Bitcoin fixes this, right? So theoretically, Bitcoin, not only makes us feel good, Bitcoin is not only censorship resistant, not only is it corruption resistant, but Bitcoin's also a better system that is going to create more wealth. So what I like to say is like Bitcoin's not only infinity divided by 21 million, but it's also a better system. So infinity gets bigger. So like just take all of the wealth divided by 21 million, you get a number that's like, I don't know, something stupid, like hundreds of millions, a billion, multiple billions per Bitcoin, right? Get whatever number makes the most sense of the global wealth that you want to take, divided by 21 million, you get a stupid number. And then you have to take that number and you have to make it bigger because in that future world, we're going to have more wealth. And let's just look back to what 100 years. So, the block reward ends in 100 years. So let's talk about like, Bitcoin as we know it exists for 100 years. And then Bitcoin's going to actually evolve to something completely different. Right. So like, let's go back in time to what the world looked like 100 years ago. Well, that was in between World War I and World War II. Germany was going through hyperinflation. Like the world looked so different than today. We're not going to be able to recognize it, and those people are not going to be able to look back at us and think that we were this advanced society living in the future. They're going to think that we were living in a old, decrepit age that had to be reborn, that had to be burned down and be redone. Just like if you're looking back at the world post World War I, pre World War II, it was wild. It was corrupt. Like the old system was falling apart. Kings were transitioning to nation states. That is what was happening at the time. And Bitcoin is that kind of level of change. So, I mean, okay, so I guess I'm just trying to say like you don't need that much Bitcoin. Like, okay, let's characterize it another way. There's only about 100 million millionaires in the world today, and then there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So if you have any portion of Bitcoin that's like in that realm of 100 millionth of the supply, you are probably in a good space. But that's not even baking in future improvements to life. Like the amount of information that you have at your fingertips right now, Cedric, in the room that you're sitting in, is more than the amount of information that the top scholars, the king, the number one general in World War I had access to. That was 100 years ago. Like you will not be like the world then is going to be so much richer and have so much more wealth for the common individual that you're not going to be able to like the scale of difference. It's like, hey, you in 95 years will have the wealth and access that Jeff Bezos has today. Like, and that's like an average person. And that's not even taking into account, okay, now you are one of the 21 million people, most wealthy people on that planet, on that earth. And what kind of wealth are you going to have access to? Now, if you're thinking along those lines, maybe you actually kind of reevaluate how you approach getting across the finish line, getting your sats from the pre-hyper Bitcoinized world to the hyper Bitcoinized world. Like that's actually the goal, more than like I need to accumulate more and more and more. Yeah, sure, get as many sats as possible across the finish line, but it's not just about accumulation. It's about protecting, it's about storing, it's about passing them down. It's about you yourself staying healthy, fit, surviving.
Yeah, and where would you throw in gold, silver, guns, fiat, cold storage, inheritance planning, and those kinds of things just in your toolkit? I mean,
all the above. Yeah, you probably need fiat and precious metals too. Like, not to say that they're going to replace Bitcoin in the future world, but they might help you not have to like leverage your Bitcoin, on the way, right? Like, it definitely helps to have fiat right now, even though it sucks as like a store of value.
Sure, yeah, it helps you get across your sats across the finish line. You kind of touched on this idea. I didn't ask you the question, but you touched on it where a Bitcoin standard world would be better for someone who doesn't even own Bitcoin or doesn't go into that with a lot of Bitcoin, because the world will have more value, be more efficient, more productive, more meritocracy. But could hyper Bitcoinization be scary and dark?
Well, I think a really good way to think about this is this idea, which is true for civilization. It's true for nature and evolution. It's just true for the cycles of life. Is this idea of peaks and valleys, right? So sometimes you get to one peak, and then you actually have to descend into a valley before you can get to the next peak, which is higher. And yeah, I mean, it sucks to think that we've peaked on one version of the way to organize ourselves that was created 100 years ago. And it's going to suck to have potentially our quality of life and our safety be compromised and potentially have to take things into our own hands to kind of survive the valley. But the peak on the other side is well worth it, right? So, World War II sucked, but getting to the post-World War II world was a better world for everyone.
So then would you say, are we in the dark ages when it comes to monetary operating systems?
Yeah, I mean, this is the monetary dark ages. We're going to look back to this and say this is the monetary dark ages, just like the dark ages were both a time of disease and illiteracy. So I think we have financial illiteracy. And you could say we even have energy illiteracy, and I think Bitcoin is primed to solve both of those things in the population and in our technological stack moving forward.
Sure. At what point on the adoption curve do you think we'll be smart enough to be bullish enough?
Oh man, when all 21 million Bitcoins are mined, maybe. I don't know. I think it's just going to continue to surprise people.
How would being bullish enough help us as individuals?
Well, what you want to do is you want to be as directionally correct with your forecast as possible. So, if everyone's chronically bearish, then or not thinking big enough about Bitcoin, then they're just, by a matter of fact, not directionally correct. And if you're not directionally correct, you can still get wrecked. Just like, hey, you can be bullish on Bitcoin, but you could use the wrong amount of leverage and then lose your entire stack, right? So that's like, hey, you were bullish, probably not bullish enough. Probably your time horizon was messed up. Maybe you're probably too greedy, and then you made the wrong decision. So you were you were right, but you weren't directionally correct enough to actually get, to actually benefit from Bitcoin's gains.
And like along those lines is the meme, everything divided by 21 million Bitcoin. Do you think that's an accurate thing to say or to describe the future value proposition of Bitcoin?
Yeah, definitely. It's hyperbolic, but that, like, the whole point is, like, the people who, like, seethe at that meme are the people who believe in outcome number 3, which I outlined, which is Bitcoin is just some other asset. Like, they can't fathom a world where Bitcoin actually is the metric system for value, right? Bitcoin is what is transferring nature, physics, into a form of communication that humans can use to make calculations about the world. So what's the metric system? Okay, they take water, they boil it, that's 100, they freeze it, that's 0, and then they figure out all the other measurements based off that. It takes nature and it turns it into a calculation system. That's also what Bitcoin does. So ultimately what Bitcoin is doing is it's creating a measurement system for value that we are able to grok and leverage and use and warp and use and kind of like use as a tool to allocate resources and capital and communicate value to the world. And the people who just can't grasp that idea that Bitcoin can achieve that, it's because they're stuck in this world where, oh no, there's going to be gold, there's going to be real estate, there's going to be fine art, there's going to be fiat, there's going to be Bitcoin, there's going to be all this stuff still. Bitcoin is going to have to find more utility in order to compete with the stuff. Like, no, like all the utility is here. It is a perfect system for transferring, from transferring the physical natural world with entropy and turning it into a monetary system with no entropy. Like, there is no more innovation that can be made there. And if that is truly the case, then we are going to use it as the measuring point for all value. And like Bitcoin goes beyond like, hey, I'm transferring you sats. Bitcoin goes into, I am thinking about something in sats terms. Like, it is actually a mental operating system. Like, using Bitcoin is not about sending Bitcoin. It's about thinking in Bitcoin, right? It's about operating in that way. It's about behaving in a way that where you're measuring and deciding based on measuring something in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I remember listening to your podcast series with Bitcoin Tina, and I think that's when I went from thinking about Bitcoin to thinking in Bitcoin. Um, and along those lines, do you think Bitcoin will change how our brains work?
Definitely. And again, I don't mean to like sound hyperbolic, but if you agree with me that Bitcoin is this kind of step change in humanity, and then you look at past massive step changes in humanity, all of them have changed how our brains worked. All of them have changed our physiology. Like, fire changed the size of our brain. Why? Because it affected how many calories we could take in, how quickly. It affected how much resources we could put into developing and leveraging and using higher thought levels, right? Okay, how about the next level? Okay, well, actually becoming literate actually changed our brains too. Do you know that illiterate people are much better at reading lips? And they're much better at recognizing faces versus literate people, because you actually, one, if you're illiterate, you depend on looking at someone's face to understand what they're communicating non-verbally. But as soon as you become literate, it's so much easier to hone in on reading text, which uses a completely different part of your brain and your vision than recognizing someone's face and reading their lips. That you just form a different part of your brain. That part gets the energy, and the part that you used to recognize someone's face is just smaller, right? And that compounds itself over time, right? Because society breeds more people that are better at being literate because they're rewarded to do that, and then that compounds too, right? So Bitcoin will do that to us too, just like all of these other technological, like, it's all a feedback loop. Our environment affects us, we affect the environment. Environment affects us, we affect the environment. And then this happens on with like these kind of like small iterations, and then these macro giant cycles too, with these macro giant changes too. And I think Bitcoin is one of these macro giant changes, where we go from a world where we are financially illiterate and we are from an energy perspective illiterate, to we are financially and energy wise completely connected, completely literate, completely in the know, completely able to self verify. Like, and that, I think that will change our physiology. I don't know how, but I think it will, because it's that big of a change.
Yeah, I mean, I've just even little ways I've noticed it. I mean, I came to Bitcoin, I think, to fight inflation. I don't think I knew it at the time, but I saw it as another asset I could diversify into and maybe get more alpha or more return. And like I said earlier, I just started thinking about Bitcoin a lot, and eventually thinking in Bitcoin, using it as a unit of account, making calculations in it, lowering my time preference. And I think about all those things as sort of being rational. And I remember you had a tweet a few months ago about how, being right isn't irrational, sort of betting on outcome number one because, you've thought through all the facts and context and circumstance. And I also think about, how it changes us and how it almost becomes difficult or frustrating to communicate or deal with people who aren't on that operating system. Like it maybe has already changed us in that regard. Do you, how do you deal with that? People maybe still operating on the legacy monetary system. And, you have this kind of rational thought, you proof of work, you've pondered ideas from first principles that maybe even people that like you love or care about. How do you deal with that?
I mean, it's hard. I think this is a challenge socially for almost all Bitcoiners, right? And maybe it can be related to someone who's an early convert to like a new sweeping religion and like what that feeling must feel like, kind of like you see this new way and your society, everyone around you does not, and they're operating on a different mindset. And I do think that like a new sweeping religion is a great way to kind of characterize what maybe like Bitcoiners feel like, because ultimately I think religions are mental operating systems similar to Bitcoin is a mental operating system. It's just an economic one. It's a values based one versus maybe like a moral or a lifestyle based one that a religion might have. But for the user, the experience is very similar, especially in the early stages, right? Where it's just you and you feel isolated. And everyone else, thinks you're crazy and you think they're crazy, right? I think it requires an enormous amount of empathy, right? I think we're much earlier in this in like the adoption cycle than most people think we are. People are like, "Oh, we're 5% of the planet's on Bitcoin," or like, X amount of people have heard of crypto or whatever. The reality is that very, very few people have gotten to the stage where they are holding Bitcoin. They're consciously making decisions natively around Bitcoin. And if you kind of use a measure around that, around kind of your keys and understanding what this thing actually is rather than like, oh, I've heard of it as your measure of adoption, you realize we're at 0.001%, right? We're at millions of people have actually adopted this thing, and we have 8 billion people on the planet, right? So we're pretty far away from the majority of the planet has adopted this thing. The majority of the people are on this mental operating system, and until then, like, you need to be patient. You may need to find your echo chamber. Twitter, Nostr, going to the Bitcoin conference, all of that kind of helps you find your people. The Orange Pill app, I know that's a cool little project trying to help Bitcoiners find Bitcoiners. Meetups are incredible. But when you're talking to other people, don't be a crazy person. Like, be relatable, be empathetic, talk about the problems that they can relate to without necessarily showing the solution. And then maybe they'll ask you about the solution. Maybe they'll be like, why are you so knowledgeable about central bank policy? Why are you so knowledgeable about economics? Why are you so knowledgeable about food and health and longevity? And then you like, well, Bitcoin put me down this rabbit hole. Like, I started learning about Bitcoin. I started learning about what is money. I started asking questions, and here I am. And I found that that's much, much more convincing. You lead with kind of that humility and empathy, and people want to be around you. They kind of look up to you, and then you can talk about Bitcoin from a place of like, hey, they want to learn versus like you're shilling them something.
Sure. It seems like everything is blowing up around Bitcoin these days. Should we plan for Bitcoin's failure or even option number three? 50 years of Bitcoin just kind of going the way it is today, or maybe the economy crashes tomorrow and Bitcoin takes another 90% dump like everything else could.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think everyone should be. I think option number 2, again, I think it's more binary than I really do think option number 3 is not likely. I'd like to define option number 3 because I think it's that unlikely. And we got to point it out because that's why Bitcoin's binary, because option number 3 is so unlikely. But I definitely think Bitcoiners need a plan for option number 2, which is Bitcoin fails. One, they need to be diligent. 2, it probably makes sense to have some sort of diversification, both in like you have the means to continue to create value and generate cash flow, and 2, maybe you're just holding other stuff. Maybe you have you maintain some sort of cash balance. Maybe you maintain some sort of gold. Maybe you maintain some sort of properties. You don't need to go all in Bitcoin. If anything, when you go all in Bitcoin, you actually lose one of Bitcoin's best features, which is Bitcoin from an investment perspective has asymmetric risk to reward. So the idea is that with asymmetric risk to reward, you can buy a little bit. If it goes to 0, you only lost a little bit. If it goes up a lot, your little bit went up an enormous amount. It's still worthwhile, right? It is very much worth your while being there. And that if you're all in, if it goes to 0, you lost everything. If it goes up a lot, obviously you made the right bet, but you would have still been really freaking well off without necessarily taking the risk or putting yourself at risk of 100% loss. So I think you start thinking that way a lot more, especially when you acknowledge that Bitcoin just being some other asset is probably the least likely future outcome.
Sure. So then what would you say are the right reasons to be bullish?
The right reasons to be bullish is Bitcoin is a step change in humanity. Bitcoin is a metric system for value, and it is not only going to create a better, more equitable world, but it is going to make a more wealthy world, and therefore, and take us to that next level of humanity and society, and make us scale even more. And that's going to make the world better for everyone. And you just don't need to take that much risk in terms of like making the Bitcoin bet to benefit from that future world. So not to say like there's a right or wrong reason to be bullish, but I would say, Bitcoin, it's going to bring it's like the tide that lifts all boats. It's going to bring humanity up, and then it's going to make all of humanity wealthier. And then what's the right amount of wealth for you into the future? That's up to you to kind of decide. I think it's good to at least think about that, so that way you can, have an idea of what you want and what you want to work for. But I think for most people, like, there is a number, right? So this idea, like, you can never have enough Bitcoin. You have to constantly just sacrifice your lifestyle to just accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible, because this is the best ratio where you can trade your time for Bitcoin. Well, guess what? You can never trade your Bitcoin back for more time, right? So at some point you have to, make lifestyle choices. At some point you have to make decisions on how to elongate your life and preserve your life and your family's life. And I just really don't think that if you're thinking about Bitcoin in a rational way, which requires you to be stupidly bullish, like it's rationally be stupidly bullish, then you would be making the type of decisions that a lot of people who aren't as, people, if you're saying like Bitcoin's going to be 1 million in 10 years, you're making very different economic calculation than someone who's going to be like, infinity divided by 21 million, the world is going to look completely different. Nothing is going to be the same in the future. You probably won't even measure your value in dollars in the future. You're making different decisions today, and whichever one is more accurate into the future, whichever one is more directly correct, that person will probably be better off. I just think that the world is very, very different between those two, kind of worldviews from where we stand right now.
I think what you're trying to say is, if you take the view that everything is going to be divided by 21 million, you just have to zoom out and hold enough and get it to that point. But that might be a really long time away, or it could be tomorrow. We don't know. But if you take the view that, it's going to go to 1 million by 2030, you kind of put a price target on it, you might be inclined to take more risk, be more aggressive. And if to your point, you might not be as directionally correct and taking on too much risk or got over your skis or misinterpreted the information. So
There's a
then
lot of
what?
ways that you could fuck this up.
Yeah,
Bitcoin's the most right thing you've
you could
ever
lose
been
your seed
on, and there's
phrase.
still a lot of ways you could fuck it up. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot could go wrong. This is nascent technology. Even just how people secure and hold it is evolving. And this, you got to take on a lot of responsibility and understanding, which I encourage people to do, and that's great. But then you have to think about inheritance planning. If you have family and loved ones and you want it to be generational wealth, that usually takes more than one generation. Let's talk about 37 sats. How did we get that number? Why is that important?
37 sats is the block reward in 95 years. And when I picked it out, it was the block reward in like 97 years or something like that. There's nothing special about it other than it's the block reward far enough in the future that all of us are not good enough to project out what the world is going to look like. And it's small enough that most people would not characterize it like a large amount of money. At today's exchange rate, 37 sats is a little bit more than 1 cent.
Yeah, well, but
so that's why I picked it for those reasons.
Right. So, but somewhere out a little further than that, we're going to be at 1 sat a block reward.
Yep.
And, the world's energy, or a good amount of it, or some portion of it, greater than zero, is going to be mining away and problem solving away at that 1 sat. Now, maybe the transaction fees will be greater than 1 sat. So now you're talking about 2 sats.
The only thing that's guaranteed is the one sat.
There's only the 1 sat, right?
That's the only thing that's guaranteed. Everything else we don't know. Again, the world
Right.
95 years ago, and then the world 95 years from now. But
it speaks to the potential value. But it speaks to the potential value of that 1 sat. And so, you could have, let's say you have a few wallets today, and one's your main setup, and you lose it all. And you lose the second wallet that had $100 in it, and you didn't even think about the third wallet that has $2.50 in it today. And if somehow you shepherd that wallet into far enough into the future, that will be generational wealth at some point to some heir, potentially.
Yeah.
And
totally.
It's the way we, like right now, like my son pays like $12.99 a month for some Fortnite skins, some bullshit. It is an incredible amount of money in some regards, that's being, in my mind, misspent, misdirected, at least for my family. Maybe the Fortnite people are doing great with it, but, I'd like to have it back, Right now it's buying my son some joy, and he has it, and I don't think he uses it enough, but, I could be buying lots of sats with that $12.99 a month. That's just getting frittered away. That one day I think will have ultimately a lot of value. So thinking a lot about the value of Bitcoin and sort of these principles, I'd love to reflect a bit on your collaboration with Bitcoin Tina. That was kind of a monumental piece of work in the content scene. So maybe what are your thoughts on it a couple of years out? And when do you think we're going to see another piece of content like that?
Oh man, well, it's difficult to follow up on doing something really good. So Tina knows this better than anyone else, so he almost always refuses to do something else now that we've done something really good. But we did an original 4-part series, Bitcoin Tina on Bitcoin. We followed it up with part 5, which is the hardest trade, and then we followed it up with part 6, which is kind of just like thinking through like the difficulties of getting your sats from this point to the hyper Bitcoinized world, and then that it's about survival. So I think all 6 parts are just absolute must listens. The whole idea is, I would say a lot of my mental model is built off of the mental model that we tried to articulate on that series. But the whole idea is that Bitcoin is this new monetary economic paradigm, and that's the only right way to think about it. that the idea of it just being some other asset is just absolutely asinine in terms of like what Bitcoin represents in conjunction to the monetary dark ages that we live in, right? It's like we have the answer in front of us and we're just living in the darkness, and we're just like, oh, this is just some other stone, like whatever. Because all of us we're financially illiterate still, so we can't see it. So that's the whole point of this show, is just is like walking through in layman's terms in common English. And I don't talk very much in it. It's all Bitcoin Tina. It's all his mental model. I've just learned an incredible amount from him. But yeah, 4 parts: how to think about Bitcoin, how to think about this monetary revolution, how to think about other revolutions, how other massive technological changes have traded, in terms of like reflecting back on the .com bubble, reflecting back on things like the smartphone revolution, talking about Bitcoin as a tool, not like as this like thing that is like nice or we want it, but no, it's a tool, just like a ladder or a hammer. It does a job. It does this one thing well that it's been engineered to do. So I think it's a fantastic series. Again, anyone who's like starting to dip their toes into, like, I would say someone who's not into Bitcoin at all, not for them. Someone who's dipping their toes into Bitcoin, someone who's getting interested, who wants to like get really up to speed on how to start thinking about hyper Bitcoinization in a much more native way. Absolutely fantastic listen, and it really opens your mind to a new way of thinking about the world.
Yeah, I could testify for that. I remember just going on lunch breaks at work or sneaking out in the afternoon for a walk and listening to Bitcoin Tina content and just kind of thinking like, wow, the world's just changed for me in my mind and how I see it and how I can interact with it going forward. One of my favorite takeaways from that was that, Bitcoin as a tool, and that tools are emergent. He spent a bit of time on the ladder, and ladder is not top-down technology. Um, chairs are not top-down technology. Table is not top-down technology. It just kind of emerges, and everyone just agrees that's what they need to satisfy that solve for that problem. So another one I'd love to reflect on a bit is your love for the book, The Sovereign Individual. Um, you asked at the beginning of the show, sort of like, how people think about Bitcoin, especially when they first approach it, or what does it do for them? And I really think about how, for me, Bitcoin just became a way to save for my future without risk. The more I learned about it. And what I mean by risk, though, is not the risk that I can be wrong about the outcome or direction of this thing, but that no one can come between me and my, I don't want to call it a bet, but like, or allocation, but my interaction with this thing. So if I accumulate 100 sats, they're X of Y units. The denominator is fixed. No one's going to get in between that and me, and no one could kind of, I'm not getting into politics here, but like, it's not like a stock that had already gone through a whole waterfall of investments and private placements and venture capital seeding and all things I couldn't get access to. So it just became this fair, open system that I can access, and then I could remove risk from, or human risk, and I could be right or wrong based on my own merit. So I know you carry the sovereign individual around with you everywhere. I don't know if you keep it under your pillow at night, but what does that book mean to you? And especially over these last 2 or 3 years, I'm sure it's gone to a different level, and sort of being rational about what you read and learned there.
So I think I've purchased probably like 60 copies of The Sovereign Individual. Here is a fresh one that is on my desk. Actually, at the Bitcoin conference every single year, I give out like anywhere from 5 to 10 from plebs who come up to me and say, yo, I want a Sovereign Individual. So I really do think like this is one of those books that is so important that we need to physically distribute the knowledge across the planet. That's how important it is. It's also dense. If you like look at it, it is a thick book. It is a tough read. It's not easy by any means. But it is so, so darn important. It was written in the 90s. It was published in 97. And it predicts Bitcoin. It predicts COVID lockdowns. It is directionally correct, and it predicts so many different elements of the world that we're seeing unfold today. It's honestly incredible. And they had so much less information back then. The internet was just starting. Like, this is like pre social networking. This is pre email becoming ubiquitous. This is pre .com bubble, right? So they were so right. It's honestly incredible. And there's a lot that they talk about in this book that have not come to fruition yet, right? So I do think that it can help you position yourself for the journey at hand to get to that future hyper Bitcoinized world. And I think it's pertinent for all Bitcoiners to educate themselves on what is a very likely future outcome. Not to say that they're right on everything, but they've been proven directionally correct on a lot, that it's worthwhile to weight their opinions. Not to say that this is the map, but maybe if you're blind, this helps you see 30% more, right? Like, that's kind of the context of navigating the futures. If you're completely blind, then being able to see 30% more by reading this book is a really big deal, because you've gone from 0% being able to like look into the future accurately to like, oh, you can look into the future more accurately by 30%. And that's a pretty big upgrade, and it'll help you find more great books just by just going through the sources in this. You can find a lot of incredible books. Right now, this is like the original version of the book. But if you order it now, you're gonna get the one with the foreword by Peter Thiel. So this book is endorsed by Peter Thiel, who, again, one of the most prolific investors in Silicon Valley investors. He spoke at Bitcoin 2022 last year about Bitcoin and the downfall of fiat money. Incredible conversation. But he endorses this book. He wrote the foreword of this book. He is distributing it now. One of the authors is still alive. The other one, his son, is a lord in the House of Lords in England. I think it's going to be looked back at in the future as one of the most just accurate, kind of looks into the future possible. And it's there's a reason it's a Bitcoiner classic, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that conversation with Peter Thiel was great, very interesting. I think about sovereign individual. I wonder, are Bitcoiners anti-fragile enough? And do we need to touch grass more?
Probably not anti-fragile enough, and we definitely probably need to touch grass more. But I mean, it's hard, man. Like, even me telling you need to work harder on getting your ish together and getting your Bitcoin across the finish line, there's a lot of work I need to do personally. It's not easy. You're living your life. You have to teach people about things. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to invest in things you might not like. You might have to change places where you're at. You have to think about a lot of stuff. So it's just not easy. But always touch grass. I do think ultimately Bitcoin is a back to earth movement. I think like this idea of like the metaverse and like going into like these pods and like being wired in all the time is like, that is a dystopian nightmare. That is not the future. The future is us being in touch with the earth, us being aligned with nature, and being aligned with our resources and being in touch with each other. And I think Bitcoin is the counterforce to the metaverse.
Yeah, and I don't like the metaverse, so I see what you're saying there. And we've been talking a lot about culture and Bitcoin connecting with the physical world in this show. And so, are you still cooking at home a lot? What is the passion of late? What's your favorite dish to make?
Oh man, yeah, cooking at home all the time, as much as I can when I'm not traveling. You know, I think my wife and I, we've divvied up duties. Like, she's the one who comes up with the side dishes and the interesting like ideas, and I'm the one who makes the protein. So that's been kind of like how we've been divvying up things. But Tonight, the reason I was late to your show, I'm sorry, Cedric, is I had a crazy day, and we had planned. When you cook at home, you usually plan stuff in advance. So I was planning to make beef back ribs on the grill, and I was running about an hour behind. So of course, the food that's like marinating in the fridge, like I can't not cook it. I have to cook it. I'm running an hour behind, so I'm cooking as fast as I can. Wife is making the sides. So trying to get away from only doing like ribeyes and do different stuff, do fish, do chicken, do some weird cuts, liver, all that kind of good stuff. But ultimately, I think the two things that you can do to change your life for the good, for the benefit, is start learning about and investing in Bitcoin, and then start cooking at home if you're not already. Both are going to change your life on many levels. Both are fundamental changes. Both save you time, save you money, improve your lifestyle, improve your health, and give you back control and verifiability. So I think that they're very much aligned, and they're life hacks. Cooking at home is a life hack. You know exactly what you're eating. You can, precision, go to what you like best, what nourishes you the best, what you know is the best. You can cut out all the BS. You have no idea how much sugar is in that stuff. You have no idea how much seed oils is in that stuff that you get at the store. But if you cook, you know exactly what's in that. And then it's honestly not that hard to become a great cook. Again, I think it's easy for me to say I have a cooking pedigree. My dad is a chef. I've always been attracted to it. But ultimately, it's something you can learn, and it doesn't. The guy who's at a Subway making you a sandwich, the guy at Panda Express or whatever, like you think that's like a skilled chef. It's just for the there could be, but there's a lot of just average people who are trying to get a job. So you can learn how to do all that stuff too. So I believe it. I believe each and every one of you, you can change your life. You can be a great chef. And if you cook at home, it will change your life. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm just I've never developed that life skill adequately. Uh I strive to one day. Fortunately, my wife's a fantastic cook. I'm very blessed there. What is your favorite protein preparation you've had over the last year? Maybe something that took like an inordinate amount of time to do, or prep, or just something very different, or just even the craziest thing you've eaten protein wise over the last year. Something very. I'm looking for new things to kind of try at home, even if they take a lot of work.
So this doesn't take this much work, and I think it changes the game. So if you like making steak, typically, people will take, unpackage the steak, take the steak out of the freezer, put it in the fridge, let it thaw out. And when they're ready to eat it, maybe like a couple hours before, they'll take it out, pat it down, salt it, let it get to room temperature, cook it. Some combination of that. Maybe you're like, oh, I only add salt at the end, or I do all this kind of stuff. What I found that is really awesome, and it helps you get like a nice crust on the steak, and it's super easy. You take the steak out, you dry it off, and you put it in the fridge on a rack uncovered for 24 hours to like 3 days. So it's not like a dry age or anything crazy like that. Anyone can do this. It's called a dry brine, but you don't put salt on it, nothing. You just dry it off, and you let it kind of get dry on the outside and start kind of like change colors a little bit on the outside. And then when you're ready to cook, you take it out, let it get to room temperature, salt it, do whatever you want to do, cook it, and it tastes amazing. And it gives it a nice crustier crust. And it really doesn't affect anything else. You don't have to chop anything else off of it. It's super simple. So a super easy way to like take a steak from this level to like this level without doing much else.
I like this. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm going to add to my repertoire. All right. Rounding out here. If you could orange pill anyone in the world, who would it be?
I think one time I said the Dalai Lama, but I think he kissed a kid recently. On this, I would anyone who has a massive reach to a non-English speaking world. So maybe like the biggest Spanish speaking pop star, or the biggest like Cambodian pop star, or something, like someone who's like reaching a massive audience, that's not English speaking, I would love to orange pill them, help them see the benefits of Bitcoin. Yeah, I mean, really what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to get people to upgrade their mental operating system. So it's going to take a lot of touches. There's going to be a lot of confusion. And that's why I answered the question the way that the way that I did, because I think like we need to, not that I want like mass adoption at any cost, but like we just need to give people as many exposures as possible. We need to give people a reason why to trust this thing, because it's all about starting them down the rabbit hole. And then, the rabbit hole kind of takes it from there.
Sure. What's your favorite thing in Bitcoin culture right now? Is it a musical artist, painting, some artwork? What, the magazines?
Oh man, I think the culture of irreverence, the
Mm,
culture of uh, telling the system that they can have it and they can suck it. Like these are the rebels that are going to get us out of this, this tailspin that society is in, and the majority of the world is like completely just completely hypnotized by. I think like Bitcoiners are the ones shaking people awake, and it requires the irreverence. It requires the like, fuck you, Greenpeace. I don't care who you are. Fuck you, Harvard. I don't care who you are. Fuck you, President of America. I don't care who you are. You're wrong.
yeah. I mean, I love that you noted that. I think we talked a little bit about how the magazine is kind of like punk rock or indie rock, and had that irreverence from fanzines back in the day, and then the music scene. Wes from Bitcoin Bay made me this 3D printed Bitcoin skull. I think it's the imitation of the Greenpeace skull. And BTC Delica sent me quartz as proof of work, and different, cultural artifacts I've received. Cipher Safe made this sort of Bitcoin titanium chip here. It's pretty cool.
That's
And
badass.
it's kind of fun to interact or have these mementos from the real world and from friendships. So my final question to you: is there anyone in the world who is bullish enough? I mean, Michael Saylor, Max Kaiser, Luke Broyles, Luke Mikic, Joe Burnett, Pierre Richard. I don't know.
All those people are very, very bullish, right? Um, it just, are any of them geniuses enough to forecast accurately what the world looks like in 95 years on Bitcoin incentives, when none of us can even forecast what like the next 2 years of Bitcoin incentives are going to look like? I don't know, right? But like acknowledging that that's the game that we're in will at least help you be more correct than not acknowledging that.
Yeah, and like I alluded to earlier in the show, I mean, going through this bear market of the last few years, I think the bear markets are almost in some ways better than the bull markets, especially in terms of learning and grinding and building, and reality checks and staying humble. But sort of being able to zoom out and breathe easier is just thinking about this notion that, no one is bullish enough. We're being impatient. It's too much. Or I'm talking about myself in this situation, but just live the rest of your life. And the great thing about Bitcoin is it kind of took me out of all those other games where I had risk I didn't want to bear. Sort of the financialization of our lives, where we work hard and we got to spend a lot of time figuring out where to store our value, and should we be in this mutual fund or that mutual fund, and what's going to happen with the politics of that or the culture of this. And so Bitcoin has let me kind of just sleep easier at night. It's like sleep at night technology. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate this conversation and your support over the last 2.5 years with the show and the evolution of that. So CK, this has been incredibly dope. I'll leave it to you for any parting words and to let people know where they can find you and your work.
Yeah, well, you can find me in person at the Bitcoin conference. I don't know when this is dropping, but as time of recording, 18 days from right now, in Miami Beach. Cedric, I'm excited to see you there in person. You can find me on the internet at CK_Snarks on Twitter. I am on Bitcoin Magazine YouTube every Thursday. I do a podcast called Fed Watch. I am on Noster, very active on there. I don't know my pub key, or my NPub, but I think you can, if you look up at CK_Snarks there, you should, or at CK, you may be able to find me. That's all the plugs. Come to the conference. Use Cedric's promo code to save, and it is worth every sat that you pay to come to this conference, because you are going to be interacting with the Bitcoin ecosystem in real life. This is the pilgrimage. You're going to meet everyone that you wish you could have met. You are going to rub shoulders with all of the companies in the ecosystem. You are going to have an amazing time. And if you're trying to get into this space in a more serious way, this is the ultimate place to be. So don't miss out on Bitcoin 2023. And yeah, see y'all in Miami.
Yeah, man, this will drop May 7th. There'll be 10 days before the conference. I can't wait to see you there. It is going to be off the hook. It is a pilgrimage and quite an extraordinary experience in person to meet everyone. I got geeked out when I got to meet a lot of people on my friends from Twitter in real life for the first time. And then over the years, become friends with people and like family, and see everyone grow and change and evolve. So it's been incredibly dope. I can't wait to see you there and see everyone else grab a nice cold beer in the sun. So thank you so much.
Let's do it. Cheers.
Yo, thank you for listening. Please make sure that you're subscribed to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast so you don't miss out on any fresh and new content. I want to thank CK Snarks for coming on the show. I also want to thank our sponsors, River, CoinKite, and the Bitcoin Conference for powering the show. My only ask is that you try and support the show however you can. Write a 5-star review on your podcast app. Tell your friends and family. Stream and boost the show on the Fountain app. Send lightning tips on Twitter, since I do all of this as a labor of love and a passion project for you guys. Please support me and the show's sponsors. As always, keep learning, keep stacking, stay humble, and be laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.